Hey guys, and welcome to a brand new video here on the View from the Crowd YouTube channel. And today, this is our first video of 2021. However, even though we are only about just over a week into 2021, it's not exactly been a brilliant start, and already the Big C has it's cast a massive shadow over the world of sports. And honestly, I'm making this video because in the UK, we still have Premier League sport going on as always. Well, what's considered elite level sport is continuing as always. However, I think it is now time to suspend all sports across the UK in order to bring this virus under control once again. I know some people, they don't want to see sport end once again, but unfortunately that is the reality of the world that we're living in right now. I remember, when we went into our first lockdown, in March, and all sport was suspended. People were like, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't know, sport is such an outlet for so many people. In 2020, sport was huge for me. It was something to sort of distract me from the the world that we lived in. When Formula One came back onto the TV, I was overjoyed. I was amazing. It was a great thing. Most Sundays for 6 months, I could sit back, watch the Formula One, and not have to worry. For those 1.5 hours, 2 hours, I didn't have to worry about what was going on in the world. I could just sit back and watch some Formula One. However, and the same when, Formula One has ended now, and I can, sit and watch the football. And it's unfortunate that we've got, to this point where we're now having to consider, suspended it once again. But I believe that it's a necessary thing to do. We're seeing in football these days, especially in the Premier League, these testing, they do regular testing for players, staff, and more now we're seeing more outbreaks at this club, that club, players getting it going, through the roof. They're starting to become more and more, more positive tests coming back, and it doesn't reflect well. These sports are meant to operate under the condition that they're doing it in a sort of a COVID safe way. And when cases are rising and more positive tests are coming back, it's not good. It's not a good look for the sport if it keeps happening. So I think it really is, up to the FA now and the Premier League to really sort of get a grip on this and say, hey, right, no more football. No more football. We've already seen, in Australia, for example, for the Australian Open, for the tennis, they are having very strict quarantine rules, very strict 2-week quarantine rules, which, because of that, is delayed the Formula One, because those two events are within a couple of weeks of each other, and the staff, especially the F1 personnel, they would have been doing their weeks worth of pre-season testing in Bahrain about 2 weeks or so before, just over 2 weeks before the start of the season. Therefore, it wouldn't have been logistically or just in general possible for the Formula One stuff to, well, the mechanics and whatnot from the Formula One teams to pack up in Bahrain and then also ship over to Australia and then ready in time for the Grand Prix. It just wouldn't have been possible. There's not that many staff in Formula One teams to be able to do that. Therefore, naturally, it's been postponed to what is going to believe to be in the autumn. There's still not 100% certainty around the current Formula One calendar, and when there is, we'll make a video on it talking about the start and previewing the entire 2021 F1 season, which is now due to kick off in Bahrain at the end of March, early April, can't remember now off the top of my head, but sort of around then. So if countries like Australia can already be sort of like, they're hosting these sporting events and making sure that it's completely COVID safe by putting very strict precautions there, then why are we allowing the Premier League to continue? Why are we allowing the Premier League to continue when we're seeing cases like in Aston Villa most recently? Their cases meant, they had a COVID outbreak at their training ground, and the training ground's having to shut, which has a massive impact on the team because they no longer get to train at the training ground. And it's a huge hassle for the club because they've now got to completely lock down their training centre, have it deeply cleaned and sterilised and everything to make sure that when players and staff do go back, it's all safe for them to do so. It makes more sense because we're now in what is probably going to be an extended lockdown. It's probably going to last more than just this month. It's possibly going to stretch into February, maybe even March, depending on how the response is for how the cases come back. But it's not then fair to have one set of rules for one and one set of rules for the other. I think, when we went into that first lockdown, it was understandable that elite sport would stop because everything else had stopped, and it was the most logical thing to do. However, this time, now that these teams are back and there's the Premier League has started again, the Championship's in full swing, League One, League Two, they're all in full swing. They just want to sort of just keep them going. However, there's no fans there, so teams are still hemorrhaging money. Because the only way to make, it worthwhile for these lower, the lower league teams is if fans are there. And when they're not, there really isn't, much point to continue. A lot of non-league teams whose seasons have been suspended because they're not considered elite. Me, myself included, working for a sort of a National League women's side, season's been completely suspended, and there's just no info on what's going to happen. Whether the season's going to be restarted, despite it not being considered elite sport, and elite sport being the main priority for, to be able to continue, or whether the season is completely voided. So, and that is the sort of the worry for a lot of teams, especially, in the National League, the non-league sort of pyramid in England. It's sort of a worry that the season's going to get, null and voided. And for teams that are doing well in their respected leagues, that's going to be a pain in the arse. But for teams that, are lower down and struggling, they're going to be wanting to, have the season null and voided because at the end of the day, it protects their own interests. So that's where it becomes a bit tricky. But while they're sat there, not able to play, not able to train, they get to then see the fact that, League One, League Two, Championship and Premier League get to carry on as normal. FA Cup is being considered elite, and while Marine, who play in Tottenham in the FA Cup, they're not playing their own league because it's not considered elite. However, they're still being allowed to compete in the FA Cup. So therefore they've been allowed to train. They've been given this exception, which isn't fair. It's either one. It is completely one set of rules for one and another for another set of teams. But if cases continue to rise in the Premier League and the EFL in general, then there is no way that you can justify continuing it. Because if anything, it just continues to look bad on the sport. Hey, look, we're continuing. However, we're doing it so at the mercy of the fact that players and staff are, getting COVID and cases are constantly rising. The Premier League either need to make sure they get this under control, or, they need to show that they can get this under control, or suspend the league. And, we just then, there's a worry of when does the league restart? We've got the Euros in the summer. the Euros can't be suspended again, because then we're going into a World Cup year, which is true. But you then do it on a points per game basis, or you null and void the league, whichever's fairer. You know, it isn't an easy, you know, thing to, you know, think of. You know, there was a 3-month suspension of the league last year, which of course then meant that games were going well into like July and even August with Champions League games, and that, of course, that can't happen again because of, as I've already mentioned, we've got the Euros this summer. Whether or not they go ahead, of course, but it's. I do understand that it's a sort of a tricky decision to make. I mean, I definitely would not want to be the one in charge to say, yeah, the Premier League needs to suspend. But I think it's in the best interest of the players, the staff, and just the people in general, sort of, who become a part of this sort of somewhat circus of the Premier League. I think it is best that the season is suspended, at least for a while. Enough to, you know, many managers have suggested a circuit break, and I think that's what it is. It doesn't need to be, you know, 2 months, 3 months. A month and a half. Something. Just something to sort of break this, sort of, you know, send players home. You know, make sure they're under bloody strict COVID rules as well, because the amount of times that we've seen players breaking them, there needs to be higher penalties, not just a bit of a telling off from the team. There needs to be serious repercussions, because at the end of the day, it saves lives, and, you know, it saves lives by being at home and staying, you know, in, like, sort of lockdown. It saves lives, and it's nothing to sort of be taken, you know, lightly. And, you know, having these stupid, like, parties and whatnot, you're just putting more people at risk, and it's just not fair when, you know, these Premier League players decide to, you know, go out and do what they like, get the rest of the countries on, you know, more or less complete lockdown. It's just not fair. And it's just something that just needs to be realised by the Premier League and the FA in general, that, you know, this can't be allowed to continue, and if cases continue to rise, it's just not acceptable anymore. It shows that they're not conducting themselves in a sort of a COVID-safe manner. So it's an interesting one. It's one to definitely ponder on. It's not an easy decision to make, but I think we get these FA Cup fixtures out of the way, get this weekend done, and then between this weekend's fixtures and the next Premier League fixtures, we start to really seriously consider taking a bit of a break, suspending the season, and just allowing ourselves a few weeks just to try and get this a bit more under control, and allow the FA and the Premier League to reconsider somewhat how everything sort of goes about, because clearly at the moment it's not perfectly sort of tight, it's not perfectly airtight at the moment, their sort of COVID plans. I think it's time that they are reassessed and looked at, and I think that's what a circuit break could achieve. I think that is the sort of what we need to be looking at, and just in general what the Premier League needs. I think the players have been absolutely shattered with the demanding fixtures, and I think they also need a bit of a break. So let me know what you think down in the comments, whether you think the Premier League should be suspended, not be suspended, should it be allowed to continue. You know, a lot of other sports have already taken the initiative. You know, France have already said that games against, you know, British teams should be postponed. I think that's completely fair, considering the sort of the strand, or the sort of the mutation of COVID that has come from the UK, the sort of the really fast spreading one. So I think it's best that yeah, I think it's best that not only the FA but the government and everything should also just sort of maybe just sit and think about this just for a little bit and plot a best course of action for the future. So yeah, that's been quite a long rant. I realise there's probably not going to be many breaks in that. But as I said, let me know what you think down in the description. Yeah, and then of course, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe down below. If you did like this video, make sure to leave a like. Link to my blog is also down in the description now. I've been posting a bit more content up on there more recently, and also I did my first article for Spotlight, so I'm going to leave their link in the description as well as the link to my most recent article. It was kind of an opinion piece on Formula 1 on why it should be free to wear. I think you should really check it out. I think it's pretty good. So yeah, make sure to check that out down below. So thank you guys so much for watching. My name's Luke.